Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Glad to be here for this.
Yeah, and we are inviting you, our listener, to join us on today's deep dive. We're going sequentially through 6 really critical pieces from the editorial, Ground Zero, and Spotlight sections today.
Right, it's a shortcut to being well-informed,
Okay.
without getting totally overwhelmed by all the information out there.
Exactly. So let's jump right into this massive structural paradox in Indian democracy. You look at a society where millions of women cast their ballots every single election.
Oh, absolutely. They consistently match or even beat male voter turnout across various states.
Yeah, the Democratic engagement is just undeniable. Yet when you look at who actually gets to sit in the legislative assemblies to actually make the laws, that number plummets to an average of just 9%.
9%. It's incredibly low.
Right, and in Parliament it hovers around like 14 to 15%. Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a massive company where half the shareholders and customers are women, but they only hold 9% of the board seats.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Right. So we have this foundational base of nearly 50% of the population that just completely disappears at the apex of political representation. If women are voting in record numbers, why aren't they on the ballot?
Well, it persists because the act of voting and the act of campaigning are governed by two entirely different sets of structural rules.
What do you mean by that?
So voting is a relatively frictionless act, right? It's basic democratic participation. But getting on the ballot, getting a ticket, that requires navigating this intensely guarded maze of structural barriers.
And who is guarding that maze?
The political parties themselves. They serve as the ultimate gatekeepers. Historically, they allocate a shockingly low percentage of tickets to female candidates.
Right, so the door is shut before the race even starts.
Exactly. And beyond the party bosses, electoral politics in India is immensely resource-intensive. I mean, it demands massive financial backing, entrenched political networks, and deep social capital.
Yeah, and those are arenas where women face, compounded historical disadvantages. But the frequent counter-argument, right, to imposing the women's reservation bill is that mandating quotas compromises meritocracy. The claim is that it introduces tokenism into a system that should purely reward the best political candidates.
Yeah, but that argument fundamentally mischaracterizes how the current system actually operates.
How so?
It assumes the existing political landscape is a pure meritocracy, which is just demonstrably false. The current electoral machinery heavily rewards accumulated privilege, dynastic networks, and vast wealth.
So it's not a level playing field to begin with.
Not at all. The Women's Reservation Bill is not about injecting tokenism into a fair system. It is about disrupting a deeply exclusionary cycle that just, reproduces the exact same demographic of power every single election.
Right. So we have to look for evidence that structural intervention actually alters the outcome. Do we have a working model that proves reserving seats changes the governance landscape?
We do. And what's fascinating here is the catalytic ripple effect we've already witnessed at the grassroots level with India's Panchayati Raj institutions.
Right, the local village councils.
Exactly. When a third of the seats were reserved for women at that local level, the entire focus of governance shifted.
Yeah, really? In what way?
Well, we saw female leaders aggressively prioritizing health, primary education, clean water, and sanitation. The fundamental building blocks of human development.
So the actual policies changed.
Yes, but the impact went far beyond just policy allocation. It actively rewired the social fabric. Young girls growing up in those villages suddenly saw political leadership as a tangible, attainable path.
Oh, that makes sense. It normalizes it.
Right. It forced families to accept women operating in highly visible public roles, essentially creating a massive pipeline of future leaders from the ground up.
It proves that changing the structural blueprint forces the lived reality to change along with it. We are seeing how institutional power dictates who gets a seat at the table in domestic politics. But let's apply that same lens of institutional and moral power to the global stage.
Yeah, let's look at that.
And just to be clear to you, our listener, we are strictly neutral here. We are not endorsing either side. We are simply exploring the different worldviews presented in our source material.
Right. Just unpacking the facts.
Exactly. So we're seeing a truly unprecedented ideological collision between Donald Trump's political movement and Pope Leo XIV, regarding the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran.
The contrast is really striking.
It is. We have Trump posting an AI-generated image of himself on Truth Social, basically depicted as a Christ-like figure, flanked by American flags. And he's heavily criticizing the Pope, while praising the Pope's brother as an all-MAGA Floridian.
It is a remarkable visual representation of a very specific theological and political fusion.
Yeah. And on the other side, you have Pope Leo holding a vigil at St. Peter's Basilica, explicitly denouncing the delusion of omnipotence driving the war on Iran.
He categorically rejected the use of religion to justify military escalation.
Right, and the friction got so intense that there were reports which were denied, but still of the Pentagon summoning the Vatican ambassador for a lecture.
Which is pretty unheard of.
Yeah, and then the Vatican conspicuously declined an invitation to the U.S. 250th anniversary celebration, choosing instead to visit migrants in Lampedusa. So here's my pushback question to you.
Okay, go ahead.
How do these two distinct camps, Trump supporters and the Vatican, reconcile such completely different definitions of what constitutes a religious endorsement of power?
Well, they operate on fundamentally incompatible theological software. The moral scaffolding for Trump's movement relies heavily on a concept known as vessel theology.
Vessel theology, what is that exactly?
It's a deeply entrenched evangelical idea that a divine power can and does use highly flawed human vessels to achieve a preordained political or national outcome.
Like who?
Proponents often point to biblical figures like King David or the pagan King Cyrus. Within this framework, a leader's personal moral record or character flaws are entirely irrelevant. They are viewed strictly as an instrument anointed to protect or save a nation.
But doesn't vessel theology just sound like a highly convenient loophole? I mean, a way to excuse literally any behavior or policy, no matter how destructive, as long as you get the political outcome your faction wants.
That is precisely the core critique leveled against it by traditional theologians. It creates a highly transactional view of faith where the ends always justify the means.
And the Pope's view is the opposite.
Right. Pope Leo's response, by contrast, is deeply institutional. It is rooted in universal moral limits dictated by centuries of Catholic social teaching. He argues that the central figure of Christianity is the King of Peace, and therefore cannot be invoked to rubber stamp overwhelming geopolitical violence.
So it's about setting boundaries on state power.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this clash exposes the massive collateral damage that occurs when a global superpower fuses religious identity with absolute political loyalty. The Pope is essentially warning that faith loses all moral authority if it refuses to place limits on state violence.
We are seeing how institutional power operates at the absolute highest levels of global geopolitics and theology. But if you bring that lens all the way down to the ground level, to the factory floors, you see a very different kind of structural power dynamic playing out.
A much more literal daily battle.
Right. A brutal battle for basic economic survival is unfolding right now in North India's industrial hubs, specifically with this massive wave of strikes by casual and contractual workers in Noida and Manasar.
The situation there is reaching a boiling point. I mean, it is a profound livelihood crisis that's masquerading as an industrial dispute.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of the contractual workforce like the invisible operating system running a smartphone.
That's a good analogy.
You never see it, but the entire multi-billion-dollar apparatus of the fast fashion and automotive industries completely collapses without it. And right now, that operating system is crashing. You have contractual workers at Honda who have not seen a single wage hike in 11 years.
11 years. Think about how much prices have gone up since then.
Exactly. They are demanding a minimum wage of 20,000 rupees a month. And when you look at the raw mechanics of their daily survival, you understand exactly why. I mean, let's do the math out loud.
Let's do it.
The cost of a commercial cooking gas cylinder spiked 600% due to global supply chain issues, jumping from around 100 rupees to between 600 and 700.
Yeah.
And rent for a tiny shared room in these industrial corridors consumes 3,000 to 4,000 rupees. So if your take-home pay is frozen at 10,000, the math of basic human survival is just broken.
The economic math is broken, and the working conditions compel the indignity.
How bad are the conditions?
We are talking about workers reporting environments where verbal abuse from floor managers is totally normalized, where medical assistance for severe factory floor injuries is delayed or denied, and where even basic physiological needs like toilet breaks are strictly curbed to maximize output.
Wow. And the unrest really ignited when regular full-time workers received a decent wage hike, right? But the contractual workforce, doing the exact same grueling labor on the same assembly lines, received absolutely nothing.
Yeah, that disparity exposes the massive structural divide in modern Indian manufacturing. Contractual workers are intentionally kept in a precarious state.
They're kept vulnerable on purpose.
Right. They lack proper representation from traditional unions, leaving them without leadership to formally negotiate collective bargaining agreements.
And the state's response has been incredibly heavy-handed. You have Gangeshwar Dutt Sharma, a prominent leader of the CITU, which is a major national labor organization placed under house arrest.
And the police crackdowns.
Yeah, police have violently cracked down on protests, filing FIRs or first information reports, which can severely damage a worker's future employability. Authorities even attempted to blame Pakistani social media accounts for instigating the workers.
It's just wild deflection.
And when the state governments finally did announce wage hikes, like a 35% hike in Haryana, or bumping the minimum up to $13,600 in Uttar Pradesh, the workers rejected it. Because 35% of a mathematically unlivable wage still leaves you starving. It's too little, too late.
This raises an important question. What happens to the social fabric when the state treats a fundamental economic crisis solely as a law and order problem?
Right. They treat them like criminals instead of employees asking for fair pay.
Exactly. By labeling union organizers as outsiders and filing criminal charges against workers asking for a living wage, you are essentially criminalizing poverty.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the recent consolidation of 29 existing labor laws into 4 new broad labor codes created massive confusion on the ground. These new codes created legal loopholes where contractual workers slipped through the cracks, severely weakening their ability to strike or demand formal inspections.
It is a deliberate disenfranchisement. These workers are trapped in an endless cycle of low wages and high inflation, and the desperation of that reality explains exactly why the next generation is making such extreme choices regarding their futures.
They are desperately trying to escape that fate.
Right. They are looking at the brutal reality of the job market and entirely abandoning traditional higher education models in a bid for economic survival. The data coming out of Karnataka's higher education sector is staggering.
It is a systemic collapse of traditional academic enrollment. We are witnessing the rapid obsolescence of foundational degree programs.
It's like walking into a massive multi-story library and realizing every single student is crowded into one single aisle, while the rest of the building is completely abandoned.
That's exactly what it looks like.
In Karnataka, there are exactly 0 enrollments in 1,091 undergraduate combinations and 170 postgraduate courses across government colleges. 0.
0. That's hard to even comprehend.
Right. Core foundational subjects like Canada literature, history, physics, economics, they are sitting completely empty. Instead, there is a frantic gold rush for degrees in artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, and hybrid programs like a BCom with an embedded apprenticeship.
Because that's where the immediate jobs are.
Exactly. The state government desperately tried to incentivize core engineering courses like civil and mechanical by slashing fees by 50%, and it barely moved the needle. It only resulted in a 15% bump.
Yeah.
They are physically closing down empty departments. But I have to ask, are we making a massive mistake here?
In what sense?
If we completely abandon pure sciences and history for AI, aren't we losing the foundational knowledge that actually drives human progress? Are we just turning universities into white-collar vocational training centers?
It is an incredibly dangerous tightrope to walk.
Yeah.
You cannot build a resilient, innovative tech economy or a functioning democratic society without the ethical frameworks, historical context, and critical thinking developed through the humanities and pure sciences.
Right, you need that foundation.
However, you cannot blame an 18-year-old student for acting as a rational economic agent in a ruthless job market. They just want to survive.
Fair point. So what's the solution?
Former Vice Chancellor Professor Venugopal has proposed a very pragmatic survival strategy. He calls it the intradisciplinary approach, aligned with the new education policies.
How does an interdisciplinary model actually work in practice to save these failing departments?
Instead of treating history and computer science as 2 isolated competing silos, you forcefully blend them. You embed artificial intelligence modules directly into arts and commerce degrees. You create hybrid courses like clinical psychology blended with data analytics, or AI integrated into legal studies or parasocial sciences.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Make the humanities tech literate.
Exactly. And even more critically, the state is finding major success with the AEDP, the Apprenticeship Embedded Degree Program.
What does that look like for the student?
It bridges the massive gap between theoretical academia and the actual factory floor. Students study academic theory for 2 years and spend their entire final year in a formalized, paid apprenticeship.
Paid. How much are we talking?
They earn a stipend of 8,000 to 18,000 rupees a month. They graduate with both a degree and immediately deployable paid skills. Blending disciplines and guaranteeing industry exposure is likely the only viable way to prevent the humanities from facing total extinction.
It's adapt or die for these institutions, but, there is a deeply tragic irony connecting this rush toward technology with what is happening on the ground in rural India.
The raw materials.
Exactly. While students in Karnataka are desperately pivoting to AI and hardware engineering to secure their futures, the extraction of the raw materials required to physically build that technology materials like bauxite for aluminum is destroying the futures and the homelands of indigenous communities.
Yeah, we see this vividly in the battle for the Sijimali bauxite hills in Odisha.
The scale of this David versus Goliath resistance is incredible.
It really is. This is a devastating collision between macroeconomic industrial ambition and micro-level indigenous survival, and it revolves entirely around who truly owns the land.
You have the Khan tribe, led by elders like Hamdumaji, who is in his 60s, literally forming human barricades at the foothills of the 1,223-meter Sijimali Hill. Entire villages are taking shifts to block a nearly 3-kilometer access road.
They are physically putting their bodies on the line.
And on the other side of that barricade is the Vedanta Group, a massive conglomerate that requires a staggering 18 million tons of bauxite annually to feed the expansion of its Landragar refinery.
18 million tons. That's a massive scale.
Right. And the district administration responded by imposing Section 163, which strictly prohibits public gatherings of 5 or more people, essentially making the protest illegal overnight. This culminated in a massive pre-dawn police operation on April 7th.
It turned violent very quickly.
Yeah. 58 police personnel were injured and 24 villagers were jailed. But here's the mechanism I need help understanding. We have specific legal frameworks like the Forest Rights Act and PISA, the Panchayat's Extension to Scheduled Areas Act.
Right, which are designed to protect these exact tribes.
Exactly, giving them the legal right to self-governance and requiring their explicit consent for mining. So how does a massive extractive project get approved if the local village councils, the Gram Sabhas, are actively fighting the police on the mountain?
It happens through a deeply troubling mechanism known as manufactured consent.
Manufactured consent.
Yeah. On paper, the legal frameworks like PISA exist to protect tribal autonomy. However, activists in the villages themselves allege massive systemic procedural violations in how those Gram Sabhas were actually conducted.
So the consent is just fabrication.
Essentially, yes. It is akin to a rigged digital terms of service agreement where the accept button is forcefully clicked for you by a third party and then legally binding consequences are enforced against you. We're talking about severe allegations here. Forged signatures of tribal members, duplicate entries to inflate approval numbers, and incredibly, the names of deceased individuals appearing in official government records as having actively voted to approve the mine.
Dead people voting to give away their land. That's unbelievable.
Right. When the very mechanisms of democratic consent are manipulated by corporate and state interests, those legal protections are weaponized against the vulnerable populations they were explicitly designed to protect.
And when the tribal communities point out that the signatures are fake, they are met with riot police.
Precisely. It results in the rapid criminalization of protest. Villagers attempting to defend their ancestral ecosystem are officially categorized as lawbreakers.
It's completely backward.
And the proponents of the mining project constantly point to the macroeconomic metrics. I mean, Odisha holds 51% of India's bauxite reserves. This specific Sijimali project promises to generate 600 local jobs and over 2,511 crore rupees in annual state revenue.
But at what cost?
Right, because for the Khan tribe, the mountain is not an inert resource waiting to be monetized. It is the source of their perennial streams, their foraging grounds, and the absolute center of their spiritual identity. You cannot formulate a financial compensation package for the permanent eradication of an entire ecosystem.
You just can't quantify it.
No. The villagers are drawing heavily on the historic 2013 victory in the nearby Niyamgiri Hills, where sustained tribal resistance successfully utilized the Gram Sabha process to actually halt a similar bauxite project, so they know it's possible.
The state focuses on the quantifiable revenue, while the indigenous communities are fighting for unquantifiable survival. And honestly, watching the institutional steamrolling of vulnerable voices is difficult to process. But, it isn't a phenomenon limited to remote forests or industrial townships.
No, it's everywhere.
That exact same abuse of institutional power is happening inside the heavily sanitized professional educational institutions meant to uplift the next generation. Which brings us to the profound tragedy in Kannur, the death of a 22-year-old BDS, or Bachelor of Dental Surgery, student named Nithin Raj.
It is a devastating event, and it exposes the severe institutional rot hiding behind the facade of professional academia.
So what does this all mean? Let's trace how the narrative surrounding his death was actively managed. Nithin was found dead in a space between two college buildings. And almost immediately, crucial voice recordings emerged where he explicitly detailed severe casteist abuse.
His own words recording the harassment.
Yes. He described relentless body shaming and deep income mocking by his own faculty members, specifically naming an associate professor, M.K. Ram, and the head of the department, Sangeetha Nambiar. Fellow students immediately launched protests, corroborating that teachers routinely mocked students from working-class backgrounds.
It was a known issue on campus.
But then, the official investigative machinery heavily pushed an entirely different narrative. Police disclosed that Nithin had downloaded an online loan app and borrowed around 14,000 rupees. The official line suggested that harassment from digital recovery agents was the primary stressor that drove him to suicide.
A completely different angle.
Right. And his father, who works as a daily wage painter, completely rejected this framing. He explained that tiny loans are just a standard, unavoidable part of working-class survival. They used those apps to buy a television, a study table, and to fund his dental education. So I have to push back on the official investigative focus here.
Okay.
Is the intense police fixation on a 14,000 rupee loan app debt a deliberate, intentional distraction from the much more uncomfortable reality of deeply entrenched caste hatred on a medical campus?
That is the exact fear being articulated by Dalit activists and Nithin's grieving family. Focusing hyper-specifically on a loan app achieves something very crucial for the institution. It individualizes the problem. It isolates the tragedy as a matter of personal financial mismanagement and private stress. Acknowledging structural caste discrimination, however, requires confronting the entire academic hierarchy.
Because it admits the system is broken.
Yes. Nithin was attempting to break through immense historical barriers. He was studying to be a dental surgeon, carrying the hopes of his family to elevate their social and economic standing. But for Dalit students entering these elite professional spaces, they carry invisible, crushing burdens.
It's not just about passing exams.
Not at all. They aren't just navigating the standard academic rigor of medical school. They are forced to survive in a hostile environment that constantly questions their intellectual merit and their very right to exist in that space.
And we have seen this identical pattern before. The source material draws direct parallels to the J.S. Siddharthan case from just a couple of years ago. Why is it that students feel completely paralyzed and unable to report this abuse before it results in a tragedy?
Because the academic power dynamics are absolute and completely lack oversight. Students are terrified to file formal complaints because faculty members wield internal assessment marks and the assignment of crucial clinical duties as literal weapons of intimidation.
So if you speak up, your career is over.
Exactly. If you speak out against a department head, they can effortlessly sabotage your medical career with a failing internal grade. What makes Nithin's case even more systemic is the catastrophic failure of the university's Student Support Guidance Program, or SSGP.
That was supposed to be the safety net, right?
Right. It was a mechanism specifically designed to provide mentorship and psychological support. But if the very senior faculty members appointed to mentor you are the ones orchestrating the abuse and mocking your father's daily wage, the safety net is effectively a trap.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly bleak.
It proves exactly why universities must have truly independent grievance redressal mechanisms and autonomous anti-harassment cells. An institution cannot just write meritocratic and inclusive on its brochures. It has to actively dismantle the internal hierarchies that endanger its most vulnerable students.
It really brings us full circle to where we started today. We have been examining the blueprints of our society. Whether we are looking at the constitutional blueprint of our democracy and who gets elected, the moral frameworks used by global leaders to justify war, the consolidated labor codes governing our factory floors, the academic syllabus in our universities, the environmental and tribal protections in our forests, or the supposed safety nets in our elite medical colleges.
They all connect back to who holds the structural power.
Exactly. A blueprint is completely useless if the foundation it is built upon relies on exclusion, exploitation, or the quiet silencing of marginalized voices. I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over today.
It's a really important one.
We naturally like to think of modern society as inherently progressive, assuming that time naturally bends toward justice and equality. But look closely at the institutions we covered today. Consider how easily heavily celebrated progressive systems, whether it is a rapidly growing AI-driven tech economy, a world-class professional dental college, or a vibrant, high-turnout electoral democracy, can actually serve as highly sophisticated masks that conceal and perpetuate deeply entrenched biases. What does it truly take to move from a society that guarantees safety, dignity, and equality on paper to a society that aggressively enforces those rights in practice?
That's the real question we have to answer.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we were eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.